We are launching into one of the most brutal battles of World War One, the Somme.
Absolutely. This is where you see this head-on collision between, old military thinking and the realities of modern warfare.
And the result was a number so huge that it's almost hard to comprehend. Over 1 million casualties in just 5 months.
It's so important to see the Somme not just as a statistic. It was a massive um, failure of strategy, and it really showed the catastrophic human cost of this new kind of conflict.
Right. So our mission today is to get into the facts. Where did it happen? Why? And, what kind of mark did it leave on the world?
Let's start with the basics. We're in northern France, summer and autumn of 1916, right along the Somme River.
And this wasn't some small skirmish. We're talking millions of soldiers along a front that stretched for, what, about 15 miles?
A huge front. And the objective for the British and French was really twofold. First, they wanted to break through the German lines.
But there was something more urgent, right?
Much more urgent. They had to relieve the French army, which was just getting hammered in a desperate battle about 100 miles away at a place called Verdun.
So the pressure was immense. The strategy, and this was largely driven by the British commander, General Douglas Haig, was all about overwhelming force.
Exactly. The plan was to bring in thousands of guns, millions of shells, and just, bombard the German lines for a solid week. The idea was to completely obliterate their defenses.
So the thinking was, the artillery does all the work.
Pretty much. Haig believed it would cut the barbed wire, destroy the trenches, and leave any German survivors too shell-shocked to even fight back. Then the infantry could just walk across.
But the Germans had a counter to that, a big one. They'd used the local geography, that chalky soil, to their advantage.
A huge advantage. They didn't just dig trenches, they dug deep. We're talking incredibly well-protected underground bunkers, some 30 or 40 feet down, reinforced with concrete.
So when the British bombardment started,
The German soldiers just went underground and waited it out.
and that mismatch, that complete failure of intelligence, it leads directly to the single most tragic day in the entire history of the British Army, July 1st, 1916.
The reality was just brutal. British soldiers, loaded down with like 60 or 70 pounds of gear, were ordered to walk slowly across no man's land.
Expecting to find nothing but ruins.
Exactly. But instead, the Germans just came up from their deep bunkers, set up their machine guns, and were met with this sight of thousands of soldiers walking towards them in broad daylight.
The numbers from that one day are they're staggering.
They're horrifying. By the end of July 1st, the British had suffered 57,470 casualties. And get this, that includes 19,240 soldiers killed.
19,000 killed. I mean, to put that in perspective for you, think about your entire high school. Everyone, students, teachers, staff, that's maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people.
Right?
We're talking about the equivalent of losing every single person in about 10 of those high schools in one morning.
It's a scale of loss that's almost impossible to process. Entire battalions were just gone in minutes. It proved this was a new industrial form of slaughter.
So who were these men? Because the British Army wasn't just, soldiers from England.
That's a vital point. A huge number were volunteers from what was called Kitchener's Army. These weren't professional soldiers. They were men who signed up in a huge wave of patriotism at the start of the war.
And this is where we get the story of the Pals Battalions, which is just so heartbreaking.
It is. The whole idea was that groups of friends from the same town or guys who worked at the same factory, they could all sign up and serve together.
Fight alongside their friends.
Exactly. A great idea for recruitment. But the downside was devastating. When a Pals battalion was hit hard, like many were on July 1st,
The grief wasn't spread out across the country?
no, it would gut an entire community all at once. You'd have whole streets where every single young man was lost in a single day.
And of course, there were soldiers from all over the British Empire there as well.
Absolutely. Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, soldiers from India, South Africa, they were all there in the same mud, facing the same machine guns and suffering terrible losses.
Now, what about the German side? We've talked about their strong defenses, but what was the cost to them over the whole battle?
Well, while the initial shock was on the Allied side, the Germans were just ground down over the next 5 months. Their own commanders later called the Somme the muddy grave of the German army.
Because they lost so many of their best, most experienced soldiers there.
Precisely. That loss of veteran soldiers made it incredibly difficult for Germany to fight effectively later in the war. By the end, their losses were somewhere around 450,000 men, maybe even 500,000.
And this brings us to a group that often gets overlooked in this story, at least in English-speaking countries, the French army.
A critical point. They weren't just a supporting act. They were essential. The French attacked to the south of the British.
And they were actually more successful at first.
Much more successful, yeah. They had better, heavier artillery, and they'd learned some hard lessons about trench warfare already.
But even with better tactics, the cost was still incredibly high for them.
Oh, terrible. By the end, the French had suffered around 200,000 casualties. The coordination between the French and the British was absolutely key to keeping the whole offensive going.
Okay, so let's shift from the big picture to what it was actually like to be there. The conditions on the ground, they made everything worse.
The word brutal doesn't even begin to cover it. The mud. You have to picture the mud. Weeks of shelling churned the soil into this liquid mess. And when the autumn rains came,
The whole battlefield just became a swamp.
a deadly swamp. It wasn't just inconvenient. Men could literally drown in it if they slipped off the wooden walkways. It made everything impossible, especially evacuating the wounded.
And life in the trenches themselves must have been a nightmare.
A complete sensory overload. The noise, the smell, unburied bodies, sanitation, cordite, and then you had the rats, the lice, the constant exposure to weather.
And diseases like trench foot. What was that exactly?
It was caused by soldiers having to stand for days on end in cold, waterlogged trenches. Their feet would basically start to rot from lack of circulation. It could lead to gangrene, amputation. It was another way the battlefield itself could kill you.
With that many casualties, the medical system must have been just overwhelmed.
Utterly overwhelmed, but they had a system. A wounded man would get first aid from a medic in the trench. Then he would be moved to a dressing station just behind the lines.
And if he was seriously hurt.
From there, it was back to a casualty clearing station, which is like a big field hospital where they could do major surgery.
Right.
The worst cases were then sent to base hospitals or even all the way back to the UK.
What kind of injuries were they seeing?
It was different from past wars. The main cause of injury wasn't bullets, it was shrapnel from high explosive shells. I mean, massive, horrific wounds. Doctors and nurses worked nonstop, but thousands died days or weeks later. The injuries were just too severe.
And it's here, in the middle of all this horror, that we see the introduction of a brand new technology that would change warfare forever.
The tank.
The tank, September 15th, 1916.
Yes. The first time these heavy armored vehicles were ever used in combat, the whole idea was to finally have something that could crush barbed wire, cross trenches, and protect its crew from machine gun fire.
A way to break the deadlock. But it wasn't a huge success right out of the gate, was it?
Far from it, no. These first tanks were incredibly unreliable. Many of them broke down before they even got to the fight.
And that mud we talked about.
The mud was a killer for them, too. A lot of them just got completely stuck in shell craters. And inside, the conditions were awful hot, noisy, full of engine fumes.
But even with all those failures, it proved something important.
It proved that technology was the only way forward. The old way of just sending waves of men over the top was finished. The tank, even a failing one, showed that armored warfare was the future.
So the battle finally winds down in November 1916, mostly because the weather just made fighting impossible. Let's look at those final totals again.
It's one of the deadliest military operations in history. Combined losses for all armies, British, French, and German, were well over 1 million people.
Just to recap those numbers, for the British, about 420,000 casualties, the French, around 200,000, and the Germans, somewhere between 450,000 and 500,000.
And for all of that death and sacrifice, what did the Allies actually gain?
6 miles. At the deepest point of the advance, they'd moved the line forward just 6 miles. It's less than a 10-minute drive for us today.
And this is where the big historical debate really kicks in. Was it a complete failure? A lot of people thought so. They point to the commanders repeating the same failed tactics over and over.
Which is where that phrase comes from. Lions led by donkeys. Brave soldiers led by, well, incompetent generals.
Exactly. The criticism, especially of Haig, was that the tactics were just outdated, that they showed a real disregard for human life by just trying to grind the enemy down.
But there is a counter-argument to that.
There is. Some historians argue that despite the horrific cost, it was a kind of victory. For one, it did relieve the pressure on the French at Verdun, which was a primary goal.
And it weakened the German army permanently.
Yes. They argue that the German army never fully recovered from the loss of so many of its best soldiers at the Somme, which helped lead to their eventual defeat.
The legacy isn't just in books, though. It's written on the landscape itself. So many men were lost, their bodies never found.
And that's why memorials are such a huge part of the Somme. The Thiepval Memorial to the Missing, for instance. It has the names of over 72,000 British and South African soldiers who have no known grave.
Yeah.
They just vanished.
And if you go there today, you can still see the scars, the outlines of trenches, the huge craters from mines that were detonated. It's a permanent reminder of the price that entire generation paid.
Ultimately, the Somme show the catastrophic gap between a strategic plan and the human reality on the ground. It forced everyone to face the new scale of death in modern war.
We talk about military goals, like relieving Verdun, but it forces you to ask a really difficult question. What price in human lives is too high for a strategic objective?
And that's the question the Somme leaves us with, that balance between the goal and the sacrifice.
Good luck with your studies.